Good evening, Mr. Corbyn. Thank you very much for being with us.
It's a pleasure.
The aim tonight is to allow our audience here to ask you as many questions as possible. So, let's have a first question from Ian Parkin.
Good evening, Jeremy. Should businesses be frightened of an incoming Labour government?
No, they should not be frightened of an incoming Labour government because our country's economy relies on many small and medium-sized enterprises that are the motor of our economy that often have great difficulty in accessing capital and accessing support for what they're trying to do. The biggest businesses will be asked to pay a little bit more in corporation tax, but it will be lower than it was in 2010 and indeed lower than the average for most industrial countries. What I want to do is ensure that there is an economy thriving in every part of the country. And so that means the resources. It means an infrastructure system, roads and railways all across the country. It means broadband in every part of our country that's free to everyone to use. And that will mean that businesses can be set up anywhere. It is also clear in our manifesto here that what we're keen to do is ensure there is a better trained workforce in our society, so we will be promoting apprenticeships and skill training at every level and give them the same value as academic education in universities. And so I enjoy working with all the business organisations, setting out clearly our views on public ownership, our views on taxation and our views on investment for the future.
Okay, there's two people with their hands up. Let's hear from you both. Starting with you, sir.
To be honest, Mr. Corbyn, I don't think it's businesses who should be scared just. I think it's everyone. Your reckless socialist ideas are genuinely terrifying to me, my family and my friends, and I think freedom will completely erode if we let you have the keys to number 10.
Okay, before you answer, Mr. Corbyn, can I hear from you as well, please?
So what about the businesses that you're going to nationalise that then won't exist? So when you say about free internet, you know, the likes of Virgin and Sky, then they haven't got a product to sell.
The issue of your views on rights and freedoms in our society, I absolutely defend the right of free speech. I supported the introduction of the Human Rights Act. I support the Convention on Human Rights. Freedoms and rights in a democracy are very, very important. I spent my life getting into hot water for defending people because I believe their human rights should not be violated, and that's the kind of government that I intend to lead, that does guarantee democracy.
So why do you think this man is frightened of you being in power?
Well, I can't understand what everything that's going on in your mind that makes you say that, but what I would... maybe we can talk about it later.
And to the other point.
Just say this. I want to live in a society where we do deal with the worst aspects of poverty that exist in our society. We do invest properly in our schools. We do give all our children a real chance, and we do have a health service that is really there for all of us at all times. That's the kind of agenda that I've spent my life dealing with. The gentleman that asked a question about businesses, on the questions of public ownership, which you're quite right to raise, our proposals are that we will take our railways, which after all were invested in and built by the rest of us, back into public ownership. We'll take Royal Mail back into public ownership as it's a natural monopoly, and our water industry, which has been asset stripped within an inch of its life by many of these water companies and wastes a great deal of water, will come back into public ownership, which will be run with consumer and worker involvement. The new announcement we made last week was on broadband. Because I believe that the government's proposals are insufficient, only 10% of households in the whole of the UK get access to fibre optic broadband. We will make that 100% within 10 years, starting in the areas, the remote areas of the country that have the least access at the moment. Hence, we can get the business development.
Okay, let's hear a little bit more from the man in the white shirt.
Mr. Corbyn, I heard you talk about free speech and standing up for human rights, and I have two young daughters. And what terrifies me is I look at some of the Labour MPs, some female Labour MPs, and the misogyny that's happened in the Labour Party. They've been driven out the party. I look at a video on YouTube with Ruth Smith, particularly, because I'm willing to give you the benefit of the doubt in terms of maybe people are doing it in your name and not supported by you. But I look at a video of Ruth Smith online where she was in a press conference with you. And basically, Ruth Smith, a Jewish MP, was heckled out of that press conference. It's online, it's on YouTube. And there you are at the end of the press conference, chatting happily to that same heckler. I don't buy this whole nice old grandpa. I see that video and that tells me all I need to know. And I'm terrified for my daughters because I see what you did in that video. And I don't understand how you can say you stand up for human rights and free speech when that's how you support a Labour MP at a Labour press conference. I think it's disgraceful.
Nobody should suffer any abuse in public life or privately. Clear.
Watch the video.
Nobody should suffer abuse, and many women Labour MPs, Ruth Smeeth included, and others, have suffered the most unbelievable levels of abuse. And it was a Labour MP, Jo Cox, who was murdered because she stood up in public life. I simply say to you that bad behaviour, misogynism, racism in any form is absolutely not acceptable in any form whatsoever in my party or in our society.
Then why, and it's online, why were you talking happily and with a smile on your face to that same heckler when she's been heckled in tears out of the press conference? Why would Labour MPs, female MPs, need bodyguards at a Labour conference? I just don't understand it, but it seems like we're not going to come to an agreement.
I've had many conversations with Ruth Smeeth since then. The gentleman concerned I'd known for many years, and I did say hello to him as I left the meeting, as you would somebody you had known as well.
Video,
and also, you don't know what was said between us.
Go and look at the video, Mr. Corbyn.
Okay, thank you. No, we hear what you say. I mean, Mr. Corbyn, under your leadership, Labour has become the second political party after the BNP.
Sorry?
Labour has become the second political party after the BNP to be investigated by the Equality and Human Rights Commission. How do you feel to be in that kind of company?
It's our process that is being looked at, and I'm very happy about that. We've laid ourselves completely open to it. We're the party that, after all, set up the Equality and Human Rights Commission, and in government we will fund it properly. And I think it's right that our processes should be examined. We're the only party that actually has a full process to deal with abuse.
So are you happy to be investigated by the EHRC?
In any form within our party or our society is simply not acceptable. We have suspended and expelled members that have been guilty of any racist activity.
Right here in the corner.
Jeremy Corbyn, you've talked about standing by human rights and so on, but recently you took a stance alongside Evo Morales, who recently resigned and left Bolivia to Mexico. There's protests in Bolivia that have turned violent in support of Evo Morales, including food lockings that are starving cities like La Paz. So how are you supporting human rights in that regard when you're standing with somebody who has protests that's supporting that use such violent means to do so?
I met Evo Morales in Mexico last year. I had a very long conversation with him about his country and about the economic development that's happened and the numbers of people that have been taken out of poverty. Obviously, I follow what's going on in that country as I do in many other countries in the world. He resigned from the presidency and now has moved out of Bolivia. I ask, and to support the other Latin American governments that have asked for a process of peace in Bolivia so that the constitution can be restored, so that democratic government can come back. That surely is the right thing to do.
I agree, but that's not what you said on Twitter. You said you stand by Evo Morales. You took a position in something. In such a dispute right now, a civil unrest, that any opinion, one way or another, is turning violent. So when you take a position in something
of course there is. It's obvious there is civil unrest in Bolivia. There are very strong feelings on both sides about people that feel they've been let down because Evo Morales is no longer president, others that probably don't support him at all. Surely the function now is to try and bring people together. I met Evo Morales last year. I've met him over the years, and I recognise that Bolivia, before he became president, was probably the poorest country in Latin America. It isn't now.
Okay. I'm sorry to shut you down. There's a lot of questions people want to get in. Let's hear a question from Daniel Holt. Where are you, Daniel?
Mr. Corbyn, will you campaign to remain or leave in the EU if elected? Why would anyone vote Labour without knowing the answer to that question?
Thank you. Thanks for your question. The issue of Brexit can be one that divides people enormously, and it has and it does. Our whole strategy, my whole strategy has been to try to bring people together, however they voted in the referendum in 2016.
But the question is, will you campaign to remain or leave the EU if elected?
Can I answer it?
No, I'm lovely to answer it. That's it.
Right. One, we will negotiate a credible leave deal with the European Union. Let me finish, please. I'm trying to answer the gentleman's question. Secondly, we will put that alongside Remain in a referendum. My role and the role of our government will be to ensure that that referendum is held in a fair atmosphere, and we will abide by the result of it. And I will adopt, as Prime Minister if I am at the time, a neutral stance so that I can credibly carry out the results of that to bring our communities and country together, rather than continuing an endless debate about the EU and Brexit. This will be a trade deal with Europe or remaining in the EU. That will be the choice that we put before the British people within 6 months. Any other option will require years of negotiations either with the EU or the USA and put our public services at risk.
Daniel, does that answer your question?
We've already had 3.5 years.
Hang on, we couldn't hear you. Does that answer your question?
We've already had 3.5 years with upheaval, and the British people voted in 2016, so why do we need to vote again?
Well, I think the demands of people to try to, some parties want to revoke Article 50. I actually voted to implement Article 50. Some people wanted a second referendum. Some people wanted leaving without any deal whatsoever, which I think would be catastrophic to our economy. People voted Remain, they voted Leave, but they didn't vote to lose their jobs. They didn't vote for deregulation. They didn't vote for damage to our economy. And I think it's only sensible and reasonable to put that option back there to the people within 6 months in order to bring our country and society together, to face the future together, to bring about a fairer Britain.
The man in the back there.
I mean, this thing about saying that, oh, it's, you know, lots of people are groaning because he's saying that he's not going to take a clear position. There is actually precedence for this. You know, when there was a referendum on Europe in the 1970s, Harold Wilson remained neutral. Okay, so for people to say, oh, this is ridiculous that he's not taking a position, it's false. It's a false position. And actually, the Liberal Democrats are saying reverse Brexit, stop Brexit. Boris Johnson is saying get Brexit done. The only person that actually has a clear strategy, a grown-up, sensible strategy, is this man right here, Jeremy Corbyn.
Just to be clear, Harold Wilson did actually say he was in favour, but he allowed a free vote on it. Yes, the woman there.
Mr. Corbyn, I appreciate your efforts at bringing people together in this country. I understand your strategy. What I'm really interested in is that the Labour Party seems to be the only party which is developing a credible set of policies to deal with climate emergency. Could you enlighten us about what you think your Labour Party policies would do for jobs and for a good future for young people in Sheffield?
Thank you. Thank you very much for your question. We face a climate emergency across the whole world. It's very obvious. Unusual and extreme weather patterns have got worse and worse. The poorest and most vulnerable people in the poorest and most vulnerable places suffer first. Others suffer later. We signed up to the Paris Climate Change Accords in 2015. I was there. I thought it was great, but it didn't go far enough, and it's got to go much further. So on May the 1st this year, I proposed to Parliament that we declare a climate emergency in our country, and that's now been replicated in many parliaments around the world, and I'm pleased about that. But it does mean we've got to play our part by reducing emissions to get to net zero emissions. It also means the possibilities of a huge number of jobs and development in our country in dealing with this emergency. It means jobs in retrofitting houses to make them environmentally sustainable, to make them better insulated, to use less energy. It means green energy jobs, wind, wave, solar. It means big projects like Swansea Bay Lagoon. It also means a lot has to be done in protecting our biodiversity, our seas and our rivers. And so our whole strategy is to develop a green industrial revolution which will create hundreds of thousands of jobs in the future, starting very, very quickly. And we will be therefore playing our part in getting to a more sustainable world. And a Labour government on the international stage will be working with others to get to net zero and make sure that by our trading policies we don't end up inadvertently exporting pollution by having strong controls here but not insisting on equally strong controls somewhere else.
Thank you very much.
I'm very excited by everything that's in our Green Industrial Revolution strategy, just as much as I admire those in the USA with the Green New Deal that they're putting forward.
Okay, I'm going to take 3 or 4 points from the audience in a row, starting the woman over there.
I noticed in your opening speech that you mentioned about broadband again, at a time when the NHS is desperately in need of funding and there's not an everlasting pot of money, why do you think that's a good use of taxpayers' money?
Okay, and let's hear from the man behind you there.
You said about negotiating another deal after the election. How do we know that the deal you're going to get is going to be any better or even worse than what's already on offer? And therefore, are we being offered something that's not worth having Brexit in the first place? So really, it's not credible.
And the woman here in the black top.
Mr. Corbyn, are you seriously saying that should you be in government, you would come back with the new deal? It may be better than the Conservatives, it may not be, and then not campaign either way up until the referendum? The Labour Party wouldn't campaign at all.
Well, we know some members of the Labour Party, some members of your cabinet would absolutely campaign for Remain. They've made it very clear.
Okay, can I deal with the broadband question first? Thank you for it. The issue is, as I said earlier, 95% of people in South Korea have access to broadband free. We have in this country 10% access, and it costs people roughly £30 a month, and it's quite selective, the areas.
It's not free in South Korea, though, is it?
For some people it is, I'm not sure about
that. But it's not a universal.
It is available for the whole country. Our point is that by investing in it, it actually promotes economic growth and brings about a degree of social justice. Listen, everyone in this room probably has a computer and uses access to broadband if they've got it, or some form of internet all the time. It is the normal form of communication. Yet there is a big digital divide between those that can afford the best and those that don't get any whatsoever. I just want to make sure it's equally available for all. And over 10 years, we would make sure it is. And I think that's actually a sensible, up-to-date, modern way of looking at communications within our society.
So the question is, can we afford it?
Yes, we can afford it, because if we don't afford it, then what's the effect on areas that don't have access to broadband, on their economic development, on the investments that might come there, on the businesses that won't go there? Listen, talk to a business about investing in, say, Cumbria, or say parts of Northumbria, saying, would you open a factory or a shop or a small business here? They say, no, there's no broadband, there isn't good train access, there isn't good bus access or whatever else. We have to invest in social infrastructure and transport infrastructure for the whole country. Otherwise, the north-south divide, the inequalities between regions in England and between Scotland and Wales and England will simply get worse as a result of it. This is a serious proposal in order to help bring economic development to all parts of our country.
And what do you make of the comments made by the Institute of Fiscal Studies today What do you make of the comments made by the Institute of Fiscal Studies today that in order to pay for the broadband and all the other things that you're suggesting, what they're saying is you can't do that by pretending that you're just going to tax the very rich, the top 5%. You're going to have to tax an awful lot more of our audience.
I read the IFS comments very carefully, obviously, and we have here the grey book that we put forward, which actually funds and costs the whole of our programme and manifesto, and I was absolutely insistent that we, as a party going into election, put that forward. It's only right that people should understand it.
And
what we're planning is 95% of the population will pay no more whatsoever in tax. The top 5% will pay a bit more. Corporation tax will go up to a maximum of 26%, which is lower than it was in 2010 and lower than many countries in other parts of the world, including major industrial economies. And we will then move into a situation where we become more or less mid-ranking in terms of provisions of funding of public services. We'll still be way below all of the Scandinavian countries, France and Germany. What's happened in this country for too long is we've rolled back the public realm. We've rolled back on public services and loaded that problem onto individuals, families, and they're often paying with it through personal debt. I think we need to rebalance a bit and start investing in people and communities as a whole, and that's what our manifesto does.
The woman at the back there. Yes, you.
Hi, I work for a charity that delivers digital inclusion, and it's not just about broadband, it's more than that. Giving broadband to households is great, but what are we going to do to make sure that we close the gap? People can use Facebook, people can use certain websites, but there's other things they can't do. They can't navigate public service websites, NHS advice. How are you going to ensure that people get that as well as broadband access?
Well, if they've got good quality broadband, obviously that's a start. And clearly there has to be full accessibility to public services online, because there is, you're quite correct, a digital divide where public services increasingly, doctor's appointments and everything else are done online, and there are a significant number of people in the country that don't necessarily have smartphones, probably don't have computers and can't access those things, and that becomes a form of social exclusion. So I would always make it a requirement that public services must be available also in the more traditional ways as well, so that nobody is left out, because there's nothing worse than people that are told, for example, to go online to sort out their universal credit, can't get online because they haven't got a computer or a smartphone. How on earth are they supposed to access universal credit in that sense? That's why we will end universal credit and bring back a serious system.
And over here in the T-shirt.
I know your comment regarding broadband and stuff, and it's very good, right? But one thing I want to ask, right? You're talking about delaying the Scottish independence referendum, and Boris Johnson's talking about refusing it, right? Is the UK like the Hotel California? You can check out any time you want, but you can never leave. I mean, and another thing, Pope gives Westminster, the last debate where you and the Prime Minister was on, right? There was 2 Westminster MPs telling Scotland what they're not getting. Surely start listening to the Scottish people first and let us have a vote.
Okay, I want to, before you answer, Mr. Corbyn, you know, I think you might have practiced that line before. Let's hear from Max Cruikshank. Where are you? Is that you there?
As Jeremy, Scotland voted overwhelmingly against leaving Europe and for pro-independence government. Why will Labour not support us in deciding our own future?
Okay, thanks for your questions, and thanks for the way that you've put them. An incoming Labour government will invest a great deal across the UK, including £100 billion will go into Scotland over 10 years. That will be a massive game changer in Scotland, where you have the worst levels of poverty and health inequality in Glasgow, you have serious levels of child poverty and housing stress. You know that as well as I do.
Now, the question is, why will you not support it, or will you support a referendum?
And what I've said, that I don't see a priority in Scotland of having an independence referendum. What I see as a priority is investing in the social and capital needs of Scotland. And so, in the early years of a Labour government, we will not be supporting an independence referendum. Instead, we'll be investing in Scotland and working with whoever the government is in Scotland to deliver that programme, deliver that improvement in business infrastructure, in transport infrastructure, and in the social needs of the people of Scotland.
So just so we're clear, what does the early years mean? Is that year 2, year 3, year 4?
The early years, first 2 years, at least.
So not in the first 2 years?
Look, I want to deliver a capital investment programme for the whole of the UK.
No, I heard that. I heard that very clearly.
And that is
the question is,
and that will be our focus. And so it will not be in the early part of the new Parliament.
So not in the first 2 years. So certainly not 2020, as Nicola Sturgeon wants. Yes, there's a man there in the black shirt. Yes, actually both got black shirts, so it's very confusing. Yes, in the black T-shirt.
So what gives it your right to be your priority, if it's a priority of the Scottish people?
There are elections in Scotland in 2021, and obviously an expression will come from that. It is, I think, our right as a party to put forward a programme for the whole of the UK, and that is what we're doing, an investment strategy for the whole of the UK, and I point out that Scotland will get 100 billion of investment under a Labour government, which will make a very significant difference to the lives of people all across Scotland. That, I'm sure, is something you would welcome.
Jeremy, there's already a mandate from the Scottish people to have another referendum. Well, there is actually. Yeah, there is a mandate from last Scottish parliamentary elections, and the Scottish people have voted for that mandate.
We're putting forward a proposal which I think will be very beneficial to all parts of the UK, including Scotland. And I think you have to look at the situation of the income and expenditure levels as they affect Scotland. Surely Scotland needs to be able to address the problems it has and the industrial and green infrastructure investment that it absolutely needs. That's what Scotland are telling me.
So I'm sorry. I know you want to make your point. There's so many hands that it's not fair if I just give it all to you. Yes, the man here in the check shirt.
Yes, what you're saying is promising things for Scotland to try and avoid another independence referendum. It's very similar to what happened in 2014 with other promises made by senior Labour members with the fictitious vow. Okay, how on earth can we trust that this would not be another case of broken promises?
But since 2014, there's been a Tory government in the UK, and that's one of the problems.
Can we hear from the woman here in the front?
In 2014, there was a triple mandate saying that we would be allowed to have a second vote if it went against the will of the people, and getting taken out of Europe is against the will of the people in Scotland.
Do you mind? I seem to have unerringly found all the stuff here in the audience at once. Marvellous so it is to have you, but there are lots of questions on other things. Will you forgive me if I see if I can... No, not you, matey, because I know you definitely want to ask about Scotland. Yes, at the back. Is your question about Scotland?
Slightly.
Maybe then. We've very little time left, so we'll be very brief.
So if you had a choice of getting power and signing up a deal with the SNP, that's not going to change, then you're going to say, OK, Nicola, we'll give you what you want so we can get into power.
OK, that definitely is about Scotland. Anyone got a question? Not about it. Yes, the man there.
It's not about Scotland. I just think, Jeremy, have you finally got an opportunity, after 9 years of the Tories, to get rid of the legacy of Thatcher and Blair and the market and the things that are in your manifesto that improve people's lives? The first question was about being frightened. I'm not frightened. I'm only frightened when I see people on the streets, when I see people can't get healthcare, all those things. Are you finally in a position, you win, and you can put it right?
OK, let's just hear from the woman in the green top at the back. The woman in the green top right at the back with the glasses on. No, the woman in the back in the green top, yes.
You say that you're not going to increase taxation, but I've read today that in your manifesto it states that you're going to abolish the married persons tax for couples on a lower type of combined income. I mean, how can that be fair? I mean, in the last year it cost something like £480 million. That's a drop in the ocean compared to what else you're planning on spending.
Okay. I'll try and deal with some of those questions if I may.
You've got about a minute left, I'm afraid, Mr. Corbyn. So you've got about a minute left. You're going to do a quick fire round of answering
really quick. First of all, we're not doing any deals with any other parties. I'm not trying to form a coalition government. I'm fighting this election to win it for Labour, to win it for the people of this country, to end universal credit, deal with the issues of inequality, injustice and poverty, and deliver an economy that absolutely works for all. And our taxation proposals will affect the richest 5% of the people in this country. We will end the marriage tax allowance because I think it's discriminatory against non-married couples and ought to be treated equally across the society, and individual taxation is a fairer way of doing things. Our manifesto, fully prepared, fully costed. I think this is an opportunity for our country to come together, deal with the inequality, injustice and poverty, and actually go forward to the future with some real degree of hope. Thank you,
Mr. Corbyn, thank you.
Today, there are 600 and more demonstrations in cities all around the world. Every country, every continent, everybody in the world has a chance today to say no, absolutely no, to war on Iraq. Why are we spending £3.5 billion on a war that nobody wants? When there is an AIDS pandemic sweeping Africa, when a quarter of the world's children die in poverty and starvation, and we say there isn't money sufficient for our own public services. Thousands more deaths in Iraq will not make things right. It will set off a spiral of conflict, of hate, of misery, of desperation that will fuel the wars, the conflict, the terrorism, the depression and the misery of future generations. Our message today here in London, 1 million and more strong, is this. We want to live in a world free from war. The way to free us from the scourge of war is to free ourselves from the scourge of injustice, of poverty and the misery that's associated with that. This movement is giving that message to the British government. Stop now or pay a political price. Thank you very much.